When I was 19, my family moved 2 states away without telling me. I came back from a double shift at a diner to find the house completely empty. All the furniture was gone. The only thing left was a sticky note on the kitchen counter that read, "You will figure it out." 12 years later, my mother called me out of the blue, inviting me to a family reconciliation dinner at Lumiere. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought they finally wanted to apologize. I was so incredibly wrong. They did not want a daughter back in their lives. They wanted a lifeline, and they were fully prepared to crush me all over again to get it. But what my arrogant family did not know was that the broke 19-year-old they abandoned was gone forever. Before I tell you how I brought their entire fake empire crashing to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind toxic relatives that you are no longer their punching bag. Sign it right now, Zariah. You do not have the money or the status to hold on to that dead plot of land in Detroit your grandmother left you. Those were the first words my brother-in-law Preston spoke to me after 12 years of silence. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. Preston was a wealthy white finance bro who married my sister Kierra, and he had always looked at me like a stain on their perfect family portrait. He slid a thick legal document across the pristine marble table of Lumiere, which happens to be the most exclusive and expensive restaurant in Atlanta. I looked down at the paper, and then up at my family. My mother Brenda sat next to Preston, swirling her $100 glass of wine. She looked me up and down, her face twisting into a familiar sneer as she took in my simple, unbranded black blazer. "We are actually doing you a huge favor by taking this off your hands," my mother said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You have always struggled to keep your head above water. Preston is generously offering you $5,000 for that useless dirt patch. That is enough to pay your rent in whatever bad neighborhood you live in for a few months. Just like how you figured it out when we left you at 19. You should be thanking us." My sister Kierra chimed in, adjusting her massive diamond necklace. "Preston needs that land to expand the Sterling Foundation charity portfolio. Having your name anywhere near our family assets makes our whole profile look cheap. Just take the money and go back to your little catering hustle, Zariah. Do not make this difficult." I sat perfectly still, absorbing their blatant cruelty. For 12 years, I had busted my back working 18-hour days. I had built a commercial real estate and luxury hospitality empire under a web of anonymous holding companies. I owned half the buildings they shopped in, but to them, I was still the family scapegoat. The embarrassment, the girl they threw away. I picked up the heavy brass pen Preston had placed on top of the contract. I looked at my mother, who was smirking triumphantly. Then I looked at Preston, who was checking his gold watch as if my presence was wasting his valuable time. I slowly brought my hands together and tore the thick legal document straight down the middle. The sound of the tearing paper echoed loudly in the quiet dining room. Kierra gasped loudly, dropping her fork onto her porcelain plate. My mother spilled a drop of her wine. "Are you out of your mind?" Preston snarled, slamming his fist on the table. "Do you have any idea what you just did? I have the best corporate lawyers in Atlanta. I will tie you up in litigation so fast you will end up bankrupt and homeless." I placed the torn pieces of paper back onto the marble table and folded my hands. "I highly doubt your lawyers can do anything, Preston," I said, my voice completely calm and level. "You see, you are about 6 hours too late." "What are you talking about?" my mother demanded, leaning forward with a furious glare. "That dead plot of land in Detroit is not dead anymore," I explained, watching the color slowly drain from Preston's face. "Amazon just chose that exact district for their new Midwest fulfillment center. And I signed a 99-year commercial lease with their corporate team this morning. That useless dirt patch is now generating millions of dollars a year in passive income. So you can keep your $5,000, Preston. It sounds like you might need it more than I do." Preston looked like he was going to have a stroke. His face turned a deep shade of crimson, and the vein in his forehead began to throb. Kierra stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "You are lying!" Kierra screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You are just a broke caterer. Manager, get the manager over here right now. Throw this woman out. She is harassing us." The commotion had attracted the attention of the entire restaurant. The general manager, a strict-looking man who ran the floor with an iron fist, rushed over immediately. Kierra crossed her arms, looking at me with absolute venom. "Remove her from our table," Kierra commanded the manager. "She is disturbing our family dinner." The manager looked at Kierra and then turned to me. Instead of asking me to leave, he bowed deeply at a perfect 90-degree angle. "Good evening, boss," he said respectfully. "The representatives from Amazon have arrived early for your celebration dinner. They are waiting in the private VIP suite upstairs. Should I have security escort these guests out of the building?" The silence that fell over our table was absolute. Kierra's jaw practically unhinged. My mother choked on her breath, grabbing her chest. Preston stared at the manager and then at me, his arrogant facade completely shattered. Boss Kierra whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "You own Lumiere." I stood up from the table, smoothing out my unbranded blazer. "Yes, Kierra, I do. I own the building, the restaurant, and the ground you are standing on." I pulled my solid black titanium credit card from my pocket and handed it to the manager. "Put their dinner on my personal tab. It is the least I can do for family." Or, I did not wait for their response. I turned my back on the people who had abandoned me at my lowest point and walked toward the VIP suite, leaving them choking on their own humiliation. But I knew this was not the end. Greedy people do not just walk away when they smell money. They get desperate. And my family was about to get very desperate. They did not even wait 24 hours before launching their next attack. Furious at losing out on the multi-million-dollar Amazon deal, my family decided to pivot their aggression toward what they believed was my only vulnerability. Because I operated my empire through anonymous holding companies, they still could not comprehend the full scale of my wealth. In their minds, I was just a glorified cook who got lucky with one piece of real estate and a restaurant. The next morning, the double doors of my corporate office swung open violently. My executive assistant tried to stop them, but Kierra and my mother pushed past her, marching straight up to my desk. They looked around my minimalist office with clear disdain, completely missing the fact that the artwork on the walls was worth more than their cars. "You think you are so smart?" Zariah, my mother, spat, slamming her designer handbag onto my glass desk. "You embarrassed your sister and your brother-in-law last night. You made a fool out of us in public." I did not look up from the financial reports I was reading. I simply took a sip of my coffee. "You embarrassed yourselves, Mother. I just provided the venue." Kierra slammed a thick, embossed folder right on top of my paperwork. "We are not playing games with you today, Zariah. This is the guest list and the menu requirements for the Sterling Foundation Gala. It is the biggest charity event of the year in Atlanta. 500 VIP guests, including politicians and elite investors. Preston is the keynote speaker." I leaned back in my chair, raising an eyebrow. "And what exactly does this have to do with me?" "You are going to cater it," Kierra demanded, her voice shrill and commanding. "And you are going to do it for free. You owe us for stealing that Amazon deal from Preston. Consider this your apology to the family." I almost laughed out loud. "You want me to provide high-end catering and full staffing for 500 people for free. That is a $100,000 expense, Kierra. Why would I ever agree to that?" "Because if you do not, I will destroy you," Kierra threatened, leaning over my desk with a vicious smirk. "I have 2 million followers on social media. I am an Atlanta brand ambassador. If you refuse to do this, I will post videos claiming your food gave my family food poisoning. I will flood your catering company with thousands of fake negative reviews. I will tell the entire city that you are a scam artist. I will make sure your little cooking hustle goes bankrupt by the end of the week." Before I could respond, my office phone rang. It was my father, David. I put it on speakerphone so my mother and sister could hear. "Listen to me very carefully, Zariah." My father's voice boomed through the speaker, harsh and unforgiving. "You are going to do exactly what your sister tells you to do. You used to wash dishes for this family when you were a teenager. Now do your job and serve your sister. Do not test me. We will ruin whatever small reputation you have managed to build." He hung up the phone, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Kierra crossed her arms, looking incredibly smug. My mother nodded in agreement, her face set in a cold, hard mask. They really believed they had cornered me. They believed they still held the power to terrify me just like they did when I was a helpless 19-year-old girl. I looked at the guest list and the extravagant menu they had demanded. Lobster tail Wagyu beef truffles and imported champagne. They wanted to bleed me dry to stroke Preston's massive ego. Fine, I said, keeping my voice quiet and submissive. I picked up my pen. I will do it. I will provide 100% of the food and staffing for the gala at zero cost to the Sterling Foundation. Kierra snatched the signed contract off my desk, grinning like a predator who had just caught her prey. I knew you would fold, she mocked. You always were weak, Zariah. Make sure the staff wears generic uniforms. I do not want your name anywhere near my event. We will see you this weekend, my mother added coldly. Try not to mess this up. They turned and strutted out of my office, their laughter echoing down the hallway. They thought they had won. They thought they had forced the family scapegoat back into her proper place. The moment the heavy glass doors clicked shut, the door to my private back office opened. Attorney Davis stepped out. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense black woman who managed all of my corporate legal affairs, and she had been listening to the entire exchange. She walked over to my desk, picking up the copy of the ridiculous contract I had just signed. Are you actually going to let them extort you for $100,000 in free services, boss? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I smiled, taking another sip of my coffee. Tell me, Attorney Davis, where exactly are they hosting this massive charity gala? Attorney Davis checked her tablet, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. At the Obsidian Estate. It is a historic mega mansion in Buckhead. They just wired a $100,000 deposit to secure the grand ballroom for this Saturday. I nodded, leaning forward. And what is the current ownership status of the Obsidian Estate? Well, Boss Attorney Davis said, her smile growing wider. You bought that entire property through your real estate holding company last month. They are hosting their party in your living room. I chuckled softly, looking out the window at the Atlanta skyline. And what about Preston's deposit? That is the best part, Attorney Davis replied, tapping her screen. The bank just notified us 10 minutes ago. Preston Sterling's $100,000 deposit check just bounced due to insufficient funds. The account is completely dry. I folded my hands together, feeling a profound sense of clarity. A major finance bro throwing the biggest charity gala of the year to attract elite investors, but he cannot even cover a basic venue deposit. He is completely broke. Worse than broke, Attorney Davis corrected. If a man like Preston is writing bad checks of that size while running a charity foundation, it means he is hiding massive financial crimes. They think they are forcing me to serve them, I said softly, looking at the empty doorway where my mother and sister had just stood. But they have no idea they just handed me the keys to their own destruction. Prepare the security team for Saturday, Attorney Davis. I am going to cater their little party. And I am going to serve them exactly what they deserve. Attorney Davis did not waste a single precious second. She immediately deployed our best private investigators to look into Preston. I needed to know how a man who paraded around Atlanta in custom suits could bounce a venue deposit check. Bouncing a check of that size meant absolute desperation. Something was rotting beneath the surface of his perfect life, and I was going to find it. I drove my custom Maybach across town to the Obsidian Estate. It was a sprawling property surrounded by immaculate manicured gardens. I had quietly purchased it through a blind trust. My family had chosen it to project an image of untouchable wealth, having no clue they were stepping directly into the belly of the beast. When I walked into the grand ballroom, the sheer scale of their delusion hit me. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. A dozen event coordinators were running around frantically setting up floral arrangements that easily cost $50,000. And standing right in the center of the chaos, barking orders at my venue manager, was Preston. He wore a tailored gray suit, looking every bit the arrogant white finance bro who thought he owned the world. He spotted me walking in, and his face immediately contorted into a mask of deep disgust. He marched over to me, closing the distance between us with aggressive, intimidating steps. "What are you doing here?" Preston demanded loudly, looking me up and down as if I had tracked mud onto his pristine floors. This is the main ballroom. The service entrance and the catering kitchens are around the back. You need to learn how to stay in your lane, Zariah. I kept my expression completely neutral, holding my clipboard tight against my chest. I am just here to check the floor plan for the catering stations, Preston. I want to make sure the food service flows smoothly for your wealthy guests. He scoffed, leaning in close. Let us get one thing straight right now. You people get a little bit of money from a lucky real estate deal, and suddenly you think you belong at the big table. You do not. You are only here because my wife took pity on you and decided to throw your little business a bone. Do not ruin her night. If you embarrass us, or if the food is anything less than spectacular, I will personally make sure you never work in Atlanta again. I have the mayor and half the city council on speed dial. Do not test me. I looked at his smug face, his absolute certainty that he held all the power. He was oblivious to the fact that the manager he was just yelling at answered directly to me. I simply nodded, my voice soft and compliant. I understand completely, Preston. I will make sure everything is executed exactly as you deserve. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. See that you do. Now get out of my sight and go find the kitchen. The adults have real business to handle. I turned and walked away, feeling the familiar burn of hot anger, but I quickly smothered it with the icy calm of strategy. He wanted me to act like the help. I was perfectly willing to play that role until the trap snapped shut. By the time I returned to my office, Attorney Davis was waiting for me. She had a thick red folder resting on my glass desk. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. It was worse than we thought. Talk to me, I said, taking my seat and opening the folder. Preston Sterling is a walking ghost, Attorney Davis began. The Sterling Foundation is not a charity. It is a massive illegal Ponzi scheme. He has been using his connections through Kierra to target affluent black churches and minority-owned businesses across the state. He promises guaranteed returns on community development projects, but there are no projects. He has been taking their retirement funds and pensions to fund his lavish lifestyle and pay off his earliest investors. I stared at the documents outlining millions in stolen funds. He is completely broke, I realized, tracing a finger over a bank statement showing a negative balance. Worse, Attorney Davis quietly corrected. The Securities and Exchange Commission is closing in. This upcoming charity gala on Saturday is not a celebration. It is a desperate final cash grab. He is planning to collect massive donation checks from the investors attending. He needs that cash to flee the country. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. He was using my sister to rob our community blind. But the next document in the folder made my blood run cold. It was a secondary mortgage agreement and a retirement withdrawal form. I looked up at Attorney Davis, my stomach twisting. Is this what I think it is? Attorney Davis nodded solemnly. Your parents, David and Brenda. They secretly took out a massive second mortgage on their house last month. They also liquidated their entire joint retirement account. They handed every single penny over to Preston yesterday. They are completely ruined. They just do not know it yet. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. The parents who had abandoned me at 19 had just willingly handed their entire life savings to a con artist. They had betrayed their own blood to elevate a man who was quietly destroying them. Any guilt I felt about what I was going to do vanished. They had chosen their precious golden child over me. Now they would reap the bitter rewards. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was a text message from Kierra. Listen carefully. You need to wear a uniform on Saturday. Use the service elevator only. Do not speak to any of my guests. You are the help. If you mess this up, I will destroy you. I read the message twice, committing the arrogance of her words to memory. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the solid black master keycard that granted me absolute access to the Obsidian estate. I held it in one hand while I typed my response with the other. Understood. I will see you Saturday. I locked my phone and looked up at Attorney Davis. Reach out to your contacts at the FBI right now. Send them the entire red folder. Tell them to have their agents ready at the estate by 9 o'clock on Saturday night. We are going to serve my family a 5-star meal they will never forget." Attorney Davis nodded, her expression turning dead serious as she closed the file folder on my desk. The bounced check was a massive red flag. Men like Preston Sterling did not just forget to transfer funds. They relied on smoke and mirrors to maintain their opulent facade. "I need to know everything about the Sterling Foundation," I told her, my voice dropping to a low, steady register. "I want bank records, wire transfers, tax filings, and a complete list of their major donors. I want to know exactly whose money he is playing with and why his accounts are suddenly bleeding dry." Attorney Davis tapped her tablet, making notes with rapid precision. "I will put our top forensic accountants on it immediately," she promised. "If he is hiding something, we will find the paper trail." Thursday morning arrived with a thick, humid heat that settled heavily over Atlanta. The Obsidian Estate stood as a towering monument to luxury in the heart of Buckhead. I had purchased the property through a blind trust precisely for moments like this. It was an architectural masterpiece featuring sprawling manicured gardens, grand marble staircases, and a ballroom that could easily host royalty. My family had selected it because they believed it projected an image of untouchable wealth. They had absolutely no idea they had stepped directly into my territory. I parked my Maybach a discreet distance from the main entrance, preferring to walk the grounds and inspect the preliminary setup for the gala. The catering trucks bearing my company logo were already parked near the service bays. My staff unloaded crates of imported ingredients, crystal glassware, and custom table linens. I had instructed my executive chef to spare no expense. We were preparing Wagyu beef truffles and caviar. I wanted the food to be so spectacular that Preston and Kierra would feel completely invincible. Arrogance is a powerful anesthetic, and I needed them completely numb to the danger closing in around them. I walked through the service corridors and pushed open the heavy double doors leading into the grand ballroom. The sheer scale of their delusion was breathtaking. Event coordinators rushed around with clipboards shouting instructions to lighting technicians and florists. Massive floral arrangements featuring thousands of white roses were being hoisted onto gold pedestals. In the center of the chaos stood Preston. He was barking orders at my venue manager, his face flushed with irritation. He wore a tailored navy suit that screamed old money privilege. He was the classic finance bro who believed the world existed solely to serve his ambitions. He pointed aggressively at a lighting rig, dictating changes with absolute entitlement. Then he turned and saw me standing near the entrance. The transformation on his face was immediate and ugly. The haughty confidence warped into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. He shoved his hands into his pockets and marched across the ballroom floor, closing the distance between us with intimidating, aggressive strides. He wanted to make me feel small. He wanted to remind me of my place. "What are you doing in the main ballroom?" Preston demanded, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. He looked me up and down as if I had tracked mud onto his pristine floors. "The service entrance is around the back, Zariah. You need to learn how to stay in your lane. The help does not belong in the front of the house." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, clasping my hands in front of me. "I am just here to check the floor plan and the catering stations, Preston. I want to make sure the food service flows smoothly for your wealthy guests. The layout needs to be flawless for an event of this magnitude." He scoffed, taking another step forward until he was entirely too close. He leaned in, his blue eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "Let us get one thing straight right now," he hissed, his tone dripping with condescension and white privilege. "You people get a little bit of money from a lucky cooking hustle, and suddenly you think you belong at the big table. You do not. You will never belong here." I did not flinch. I let him speak, letting him reveal the ugly racist undercurrent that had always defined his interactions with me. "You are only here because my wife took pity on you," Preston continued, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "She decided to throw your little business a bone to save you from complete ruin. But do not mistake her charity for an invitation to our world. Do not ruin my wife's night. If you embarrass us, or if the food is anything less than spectacular, I will personally make sure you never work in Atlanta again." I have the mayor, the city council, and every major developer on speed dial. I can crush you with a single phone call. Do not test me. I looked at his smug face, his absolute certainty that he held all the cards. He was trying to terrify the 19-year-old girl who used to wash dishes for her family. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the venue manager he had just been yelling at answered directly to me. He had no idea that the ground he stood on belonged to me. He had no idea that his bounce check was currently sitting in a file on my desk. I simply smiled. A soft, compliant smile that I knew would feed his massive ego. I understand completely, Preston, I said, my voice quiet and deferential. I know exactly what my role is here. I will make sure everything is executed exactly as you deserve. You will not have to worry about a single thing. He gave a short, dismissive laugh, turning away from me in disgust. See that you do. Now get out of my sight and go find the kitchen where you belong. The adults have real business to handle. I turned and walked away, feeling the familiar burn of hot anger flaring in my chest. But I quickly smothered it with the icy calm of strategy. I walked back through the service corridors, my heels clicking against the concrete floor. He wanted me to act like the help. He wanted me to be invisible. I was perfectly willing to play that role until the trap snapped entirely shut. When a predator believes their prey is weak, they stop paying attention to their surroundings. I stepped out into the humid Atlanta air and pulled out my phone, dialing Attorney Davis. The investigation was not just about exposing a fraud anymore. It was about tearing down a man who believed his privilege made him a god. The clock was ticking toward Saturday night, and I was ready to watch him fall. Attorney Davis answered on the first ring. I told her I was leaving the estate and needed to see whatever her forensic accountants had unearthed. She instructed me to meet her at a private data facility we utilized for high-level corporate acquisitions. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in a windowless conference room surrounded by whiteboards and secure servers. Attorney Davis walked in carrying a leather briefcase. She did not look triumphant. She looked deeply disturbed. She set the briefcase on the metal table and snapped the locks open. She pulled out a stack of documents so thick it landed with a heavy thud. "This is not just financial mismanagement, Zariah," she said, her voice completely devoid of its usual sharp humor. "This is financial slaughter." I pulled the stack toward me and opened the top folder. The first page was a complex organizational chart linking the Sterling Foundation to dozens of offshore shell companies. I scanned the names of the associated accounts and my breath hitched in my throat. These were not random corporate investors. These were names of prominent Black megachurches across Atlanta. These were community development funds meant for minority business grants. These were teachers' unions and local retirement co-ops. Preston is not running a charity, I said, staring at the staggering numbers. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. Attorney Davis nodded, tapping a specific column on the spreadsheet. A textbook Ponzi scheme, but tailored with a sickening level of cultural exploitation. He has been using your sister to gain access to these spaces. Kierra parades around as the beautiful, successful hometown girl who married a brilliant Wall Street mind. She introduces him to pastors, community leaders, and affluent Black professionals. Preston swoops in with his tailored suits and his aggressive finance jargon, promising them guaranteed double-digit returns on community reinvestment projects. He tells them they are building generational wealth. But there are no reinvestment projects. There is no generational wealth. Every single dollar they hand him goes straight into his personal accounts. He is using fresh money from new victims to pay off the older investors, just enough to keep them quiet, while he siphons millions to fund his own lavish lifestyle. I felt a visceral surge of disgust. Preston looked at people who looked like me and saw nothing but easy targets. He used his proximity to Blackness through Kierra as a weapon of ultimate betrayal. "How much has he stolen?" I asked, turning the page to look at the bank statements. "Right now, the deficit is sitting at roughly $40 million, Attorney Davis replied. "And the well has completely run dry. That bounce check for the venue was not a fluke. He is literally robbing Peter to pay Paul, but Peter's bank account is empty." That brings us to the upcoming gala. I looked at the guest list. Kierra had demanded I cater for free. 500 of the wealthiest individuals in Atlanta. Politicians, local celebrities, and business moguls. The gala is a trap, I realized, gripping the edges of the folder. Attorney Davis confirmed my suspicion. It is a desperate final cash grab. The Securities and Exchange Commission has caught wind of the irregularities. We have inside confirmation that an official SEC audit is going to hit the Sterling Foundation in less than 2 weeks. Preston knows he is finished. He needs a massive influx of untraceable cash immediately. He plans to use the emotional charity videos at the gala to pressure those 500 guests into writing massive donation checks on the spot. He will take that money, transfer it to a non-extradition country, and vanish before the federal auditors even boot up their computers. He is going to leave your sister holding the bag. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sheer magnitude of his arrogance wash over me. He had stood in my venue just hours ago, looking down his nose at me, demanding that I serve his guests, while he actively planned to destroy hundreds of lives. He truly believed he was the smartest person in the room. He believed he could leverage my business to host his grand escape plan and leave me with the bill. What about Kierra? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Is she complicit in the fraud, or is she just a convenient idiot? Attorney Davis pulled out a separate file. From what our analysts can tell, Kierra is completely in the dark regarding the mechanics of the scheme. She just signs where he tells her to sign and spends whatever he puts in her account. She is blinded by the status he provides. She believes she is a high society philanthropist. She has no idea her entire life is funded by stolen pensions from the very community she claims to represent. I stared at the paperwork, feeling the immense weight of the truth. My family had always worshipped money and status above all else. They had thrown me away because I did not fit their shallow narrative of success. Now they had tethered their entire existence to a man who was nothing more than a high-class parasite. The irony was almost suffocating. You have the power to stop this right now, Attorney Davis said quietly. We can send this entire dossier to the authorities today. Preston would be arrested before he even finishes setting up his floral arrangements. I shook my head slowly. No. If we hand this over now, he will hire expensive attorneys and drag this out for years. He will spin a narrative claiming it was a simple accounting error. I want him exposed publicly. I want the people he tried to scam sitting in that room when the truth comes out. I want him to fall from the highest pedestal. Prepare the financial records for public broadcast. When Preston Sterling takes that stage on Saturday night, he is going to deliver a presentation that will end his miserable career permanently. Attorney Davis pulled one final document from the bottom of her leather briefcase. She did not slide it across the table with the same sharp energy as the others. Instead, she held it for a moment, looking at me with a rare flicker of sympathy. I thought you were prepared for everything, Zariah, she said quietly. But you need to brace yourself for this one. I took the heavy manila folder from her hands. The tab on the side bore the names Brenda and David Washington, my parents. I opened the cover and my eyes immediately locked onto the bold black ink of a bank transfer authorization. It was dated just 3 weeks ago. I traced my finger across the numbers, trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of their foolishness. They emptied their retirement accounts. I whispered, the reality of the document settling over me like a suffocating blanket. Every single penny they saved from 40 years of working. Attorney Davis pointed to the second page. It gets worse. Turn it over. I flipped the page and felt the breath knock out of my lungs. It was a secondary mortgage agreement. They had leveraged the equity on their 4-bedroom house in Alpharetta, the same house they had kicked me out of 12 years ago. They had taken a massive high-interest loan against the property and wired the entire lump sum directly into Preston Sterling's fraudulent offshore holding account. Why would they do this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They were always so obsessed with financial security. They used to scream at me for leaving lights on to save pennies on the electric bill. Why would they hand everything over to a man who has only been in the family for 3 years? Attorney Davis pulled up a social media profile on her tablet and pushed it toward me. Because Kierra sold them a lifestyle they could not afford to maintain. I looked at Kierra's page. It was an endless feed of pure, unadulterated vanity. Kierra and Preston on a yacht in Monaco. Kierra and Preston at a private wine tasting in Napa. And right there in the background of the photos were my parents. Brenda draped in designer brands she clearly could not afford on a standard pension. David smoking imported cigars on the deck of Preston's rented boat. They were desperate to look like they belonged to Atlanta's ultra-elite. Preston promised them an exclusive insider rate on his real estate fund. He told them he would double their net worth in 6 months. They bought the lie because they worshipped the messenger. They tied their entire survival to the golden child. I said the bitter truth, burning the back of my throat. They threw me away because I was struggling, and they bet their entire lives on a man who is actively robbing them blind. Attorney Davis folded her hands on the table. The SEC audit will freeze all of Preston's assets by Monday morning. The banks will immediately call in the secondary mortgage when the fraud goes public. Your parents will lose their home, Zariah. They will have zero retirement. They will be destitute. You have the power to stop their specific transfer right now. We could send a quiet legal notice to their bank, flagging the transaction as fraudulent before the funds are completely absorbed into Preston's debt spiral. You can warn them. The moral dilemma hung in the sterile air of the conference room. All I had to do was pick up my phone. I could call Brenda right now and tell her to cancel the wire transfer. I could save them from absolute ruin. I stared at the signatures on the mortgage document. My mother's elegant cursive. My father's sharp, rigid print. I closed my eyes, and the memory of my 19th birthday hit me with violent clarity. It was not a sad, quiet memory. It was a loud, terrifying night. I had been working a double shift at a local diner to pay for my college textbooks because my parents refused to help. I came home at 2 in the morning in a freezing downpour. My key would not turn in the lock. They had changed it. When I knocked on the door, my father opened it just a crack. He looked at me shivering on the porch and said, "Kierra needs the extra room for her home office, and you are draining our resources. It is time for you to be an adult." He shut the door in my face and locked the deadbolt. I slept in my rusted car for 3 months. I washed my hair in gas station sinks. They never called to check if I was alive. I opened my eyes and looked at Attorney Davis. "No, do not stop the transfer. Do not flag the account." Attorney Davis did not blink. She simply nodded. "Understood, boss. If I warn them," I explain, my voice turning to ice, "they will not believe me. They will run straight to Preston and tell him I am trying to sabotage his business. It will tip him off to the SEC audit and give him the head start he needs to flee the country with millions of dollars belonging to innocent people." My parents made their bed when they chose prestige over their own daughter. I am not going to jeopardize a federal investigation to save 2 people who would gladly step over my dead body to get to a country club dinner. My phone buzzed on the table, interrupting the heavy silence. It was a text message from my mother, Brenda. "Kierra is hosting a private family dinner tonight at her estate," the message read. "Preston wants to discuss the final catering menu with you. Wear something presentable for once. Try not to embarrass us in front of your brother-in-law." I stared at the glowing screen. They were about to lose everything they owned to the very man they were ordering me to impress. The absolute sheer delusion of it was almost poetic. They were demanding I bow down to the butcher who was actively sharpening his knives. I picked up my phone and typed a rapid response. "I will be there. I would not miss it for the world." I stood up from the conference table and adjusted my jacket. Attorney Davis gathered the files, returning them to her briefcase. The trap was set. The evidence was secured. Now I just needed to look my parents in the eye and watch them proudly parade their own executioner. I was going to sit at their dinner table and let them dig their graves exactly as deep as they wanted. Let them fall. I parked my unassuming rental car at the bottom of the sweeping circular driveway of Kierra and Preston's Buckhead mansion. I had left the Maybach at home to play my assigned role. The house was a grotesque monument to new money. Massive Grecian columns flanked the entryway, and a custom fountain shot illuminated water into the humid Atlanta night. Every brick of this estate was paid for by the stolen pensions of hard-working people, but my family walked through these halls like royalty. I knocked on the heavy oak door. A uniformed maid answered and escorted me into the formal dining room. The scene waiting for me was straight out of a glossy lifestyle magazine. Kierra sat at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a silk slip dress and dripping in diamonds. Preston sat opposite her, swirling a glass of amber liquid. My parents David and Brenda occupied the middle seats, beaming with a sickening level of pride. "Ah, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Preston said, his voice laced with mock enthusiasm. He did not stand to greet me. He just pointed his crystal glass at an empty chair near the kitchen door. "Have a seat, Zariah. We already ordered the first course, but I am sure the chef can scrape together a plate for you." I took my seat, smoothing my hands over my lap. The dining room walls were lined with expensive abstract art. I knew for a fact Preston had purchased those paintings using funds siphoned directly from a community outreach grant. "So glad you could take a break from your little cooking business," Brenda said, picking up her salad fork. "Kierra tells me you are actually going to behave and handle the catering for the Foundation Gala this weekend. It is about time you contributed something useful to this family." "I am just doing my part to support Preston's vision," I replied, keeping my tone completely flat. I picked up my water glass and looked directly at my father. "Speaking of visions, I have been reading the financial news lately. I heard the private equity market is incredibly volatile right now, with inflation and the new federal regulations kicking in. Are you and Mom worried about your retirement security?" The entire table went dead silent. Kierra let out a sharp, dramatic sigh and rolled her eyes. Preston smirked, hiding his panic behind a sip of bourbon. But it was my mother who broke the silence with a loud, barking laugh. She set her fork down and looked at me as if I had just told the most ridiculous joke she had ever heard. "Volatile market," Brenda scoffed, shaking her head. "Oh, Zariah, please do not try to speak about things you cannot possibly comprehend. You run a catering kitchen. You balance receipts for grocery orders. You do not understand high-level finance. I just think it is important to be cautious." I pushed gently, offering them one final invisible rope. "Especially with life savings. A lot of funds are going under right now, leaving investors with absolutely nothing." My father slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table, rattling the silverware. "That is enough." David snapped, his voice thick with unearned authority. "You have always been jealous of your sister, and now you are trying to project your financial anxiety onto us. We are doing better than fine. We are building a dynasty." Brenda reached over and patted Preston's arm with sickening affection. "Preston is a financial genius, Zariah. He has given us exclusive access to his private real estate fund. He is literally doubling our net worth as we speak. We are securing our legacy. You should be taking notes instead of casting doubt. But then again, you have always been a bitter girl. No husband, no real assets, no legacy. Just a sad, lonely life holding on to grudges." The sheer venom in her voice was staggering. She was sitting there bragging about doubling her net worth mere hours after handing her entire existence over to a criminal. She was wearing a designer dress while her house was one missed payment away from foreclosure. David leaned forward, pointing a stern finger at me. "You need to humble yourself, Zariah. You are 31 years old and you have nothing to show for it. Instead of coming into this house and questioning a man who actually knows how the world works, you should be begging Preston for financial advice. If you scrape together whatever pennies you have hidden under your mattress, maybe he would be kind enough to let you invest in a starter tier of his fund." Preston chuckled, rubbing his jaw. He looked at me with that signature predatory gleam in his eye. "Now, David, let us not overwhelm her. High-yield investments require a certain appetite for risk. But your father is right, Zariah. If you can manage to put together $10,000, I might be able to find a small corner in my portfolio for you. Call it a family discount. I am always happy to help the less fortunate pull themselves up by their bootstraps." I looked at the four of them. I looked at the stolen art on the walls. I looked at the diamonds around my sister's neck. I looked at the parents who had locked me out in the freezing rain 12 years ago, and who were now eagerly trying to feed me to the very wolf devouring them. Any lingering shred of daughterly guilt evaporated into thin air. The absolute arrogance and cruelty they displayed extinguished the last flickering ember of my compassion. They did not just want me to fail, they wanted me to bow down and worship the people destroying me. That is a very generous offer, Preston. I said, my voice steady and sweet. I will definitely keep your investment strategy in mind. You all seem so incredibly confident about the future. I am sure this weekend will be a massive turning point for the entire family. Kierra smiled, taking a sip of her champagne. It will be the event of the season. Preston is going to secure millions in new funding, and I am going to be the face of Atlanta philanthropy. Just make sure the appetizers are hot, Zariah. Do not embarrass me in front of the mayor. I smiled back at her, a genuine bright smile that completely unnerved her. I promise, Kierra, I replied, standing up from the table. I will serve you exactly what you ordered. I excused myself from the dining room before the main course even arrived, claiming I had an early morning kitchen prep. I walked out the heavy oak doors and stepped into the humid night air. As I walked down the sweeping driveway toward my rental car, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my encrypted messaging app and typed a quick message to Attorney Davis. Send the files to the FBI right now. Unleash hell. I watched the delivery confirmation checkmark appear on my encrypted messaging app. The message was sent. The federal authorities were about to receive the exact blueprint of Preston Sterling and his massive financial fraud. But before my hand could even grasp the door handle of my rented sedan, the heavy mahogany front doors of the mansion swung wide open. The warm golden light from the foyer spilled out onto the cobblestone driveway. My mother and sister stepped out into the thick, humid Atlanta night. They were not coming out to say a polite goodbye. Greedy people always need to have the last word. They need to ensure you feel entirely diminished before you leave their presence. Kierra marched down the sweeping stone steps, her silk slip dress rustling and her diamonds catching the outdoor security lights. She held a crystal wine glass in one hand and a condescending smirk on her face. Running away already? Zariah, my sister, taunted, her voice echoing across the quiet, affluent neighborhood. You always retreat when the conversations get a little too sophisticated for you. I suppose discussing real wealth is intimidating when you spend your life sweating in a commercial kitchen. I slid my phone into my pocket and turned to face them. I leaned back against the hood of my car, crossing my arms. I am not running anywhere, Kierra. I just have actual business to run in the morning. Some of us work for our money instead of waiting for a husband to hand us an allowance. Kierra let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Do not project your bitter independence onto me. You are just embarrassed because Preston offered you a handout at the dinner table and you realized how pathetic your little life actually is. You have always been the family embarrassment. Even when we were teenagers, you dragged us down. You could not fit in at the private schools. You refused to network with the right social circles. You were always so stubborn and unrefined. My mother Brenda descended the stairs and came to stand right beside her golden child. She crossed her arms, matching my posture, but her eyes were entirely devoid of any maternal warmth. Kierra is right, Zariah. You walked into this house tonight with that same defensive, terrible attitude you had when you were 19. We invited you here to extend an olive branch, and you sat at my dining table questioning my husband and my son-in-law like you are some kind of financial authority. It is incredibly disrespectful. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who was currently lecturing me about disrespect while she secretly lived on stolen pensions. I decided to push the knife exactly where it hurt. I wanted to see just how deep her delusion ran. An olive branch, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You call tossing me a catering gig an olive branch. You call mocking me at dinner a family reunion. Tell me, Mother, since we are finally being honest tonight. Why did you really invite me here? Because it certainly is not out of guilt for what you did 12 years ago. Brenda let out a harsh scoff, tossing her head back. Guilt? Why on earth would I feel guilty? Because you abandoned your teenage daughter, I replied, taking a slow, deliberate step toward them. You packed up the entire house while I was working a double shift to pay for my own education. You did not call me. You did not leave a forwarding address. You left a sticky note on the kitchen counter telling me to figure it out, and you moved 2 states away. I slept in the back of my rusted car for 3 months. I want to hear you say it, Mother. I want to hear your justification for throwing your own child away like garbage. The driveway was dead silent, except for the distant sound of the neighborhood security patrol cars. I searched my mother's face for any flicker of remorse. A tear, a break in her haughty expression, a single ounce of regret. There was absolutely nothing. Her face remained a cold, hard mask of absolute vanity. I am not going to apologize for surviving, Zariah. Brenda stated, her voice dripping with pure, unapologetic malice. You were a difficult, stubborn burden. You refused to listen to my guidance. You wanted to do things your own way, and you were draining our limited resources. Kierra was the one with real potential. She knew how to mingle with the right people. She understood that image and status were the keys to building a legacy. Staying in that cramped house and dragging you along would have anchored us to mediocrity. Leaving you behind made us stronger. We cut the dead weight so we could rise, and look at us now. She gestured proudly toward the massive mansion behind her, completely blind to the fact that it was entirely funded by a criminal Ponzi scheme. She looked at Kierra with absolute adoration, and then looked back at me with utter contempt. You were a sacrifice we had to make, Brenda concluded without a single shred of hesitation. And seeing how you turned out a 31-year-old single caterer driving a cheap rental car, I know I made the exact right decision. That was it. That was the moment the final invisible string tying my heart to my biological family snapped completely. Any lingering daughterly guilt I harbored about destroying them vanished into the humid night air. I had wondered if sending those files to the FBI was too harsh. I had wondered if I should have warned them about losing their home and their retirement savings to Preston's fraudulent fund. But hearing my mother proudly call my abandonment a necessary sacrifice eradicated every ounce of my mercy. They were not victims of Preston Sterling. They were his perfect accomplices. They shared his greed, his cruelty, and his absolute disregard for human life. I smiled. It was not a defensive smile or a bitter smile. It was a terrifyingly calm smile of complete and utter liberation. You are absolutely right, Mother, I said, my voice smooth as glass. You made the exact right decision. You chose the daughter with the real potential. And you chose the perfect son-in-law to secure your legacy. You all deserve exactly what you have coming to you. Kierra narrowed her eyes, sensing the shift in my demeanor, but unable to comprehend it. You are psychotic, Zariah. Just make sure your little staff shows up on time this Saturday. And remember, you use the service elevator. You are the help. I will be exactly where I belong. Kierra, I promised, opening my car door. And I guarantee you this Saturday night will be the most unforgettable event of your entire life. Enjoy your home. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. I did not look back as I drove down the sweeping driveway, leaving them standing in the glow of their fake stolen empire. As I pulled out onto the main road, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced down at the illuminated screen. It was a secure message from Attorney Davis. The FBI field office has confirmed receipt of the dossier. The trap is officially armed. They are ready to move on your signal this Saturday. The drive back to my actual home, a sprawling modern penthouse in the heart of Midtown, gave me the silence I needed to finalize my strategy. I watched the city skyline approach through the windshield. Every skyscraper, every illuminated corporate logo reminded me of what it actually took to build real power. I had spent 12 grueling years transforming my pain into an impenetrable armor of financial dominance. I did not rely on wealthy husbands or stolen community funds. I built my empire brick by brick, contract by contract. When I pulled into my private underground parking garage, my mind was already shifting gears toward the gala. Preston believed he was going to use my catering company as a backdrop for his grand escape. Kierra believed she was going to use my presence to humiliate me in front of Atlanta high society. Brenda and David believed their retirement was safely multiplying in a lucrative offshore account. Their collective ignorance was almost a work of art. I stepped onto my private elevator and keyed in my security code. The doors slid closed, sealing me in a quiet, metallic hum. I pulled my phone back out and sent a final directive to my elite event management team. The instructions were precise. The food must be flawless. The champagne must flow endlessly. The service must be the absolute peak of luxury. I wanted the Sterling Foundation Gala to look and feel like the most triumphant night of Preston's miserable life, right up until the exact second the federal agents kicked the doors off the hinges. They wanted me to be the help. I was going to serve them a masterclass in absolute destruction. The next morning, my phone started vibrating relentlessly before I even poured my first cup of coffee. Attorney Davis had sent me a screen recording with a single caption reading, "You need to see this immediately." I tapped the video file and watched my sister Kierra fill my screen. She was sitting in her massive marble kitchen wearing full designer glam, holding a green juice. Her face was set in an expression of mock sympathy that she had perfected for her 2 million followers. "Hey guys," Kierra said into her camera, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I just wanted to hop on here and talk about something really close to my heart. Family. As you all know, Preston and I are hosting the biggest charity gala of the year this Saturday. But what you do not know is that I made a very personal decision regarding the event. My estranged sister has been struggling with a tiny little catering hustle for years. It has been so hard watching her fail to get her life together. So Preston and I decided to do some real charity at home. We hired her company to cater our 500-guest gala. We are basically keeping her business afloat. It is so important to lift up the less fortunate, especially when they are your own blood. Remember to buy your gala tickets, guys. We are changing lives. I locked my phone and set it face down on my kitchen island. The sheer audacity of her video was astounding. She was using my non-existent struggle to brand herself as a benevolent savior, while her husband was literally days away from a federal indictment for stealing from our community. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an incoming call from Marcus, my executive chef. I answered the call and immediately had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Did you see what she posted?" Marcus shouted, his voice echoing with absolute rage. "Boss, my entire kitchen staff is losing their minds. She is calling us a struggling hustle. We hold 3 international hospitality awards. We cater for foreign dignitaries. I have line cooks wanting to jump in the comments right now and post our revenue sheets just to shut her up. Give me the word and I will have our legal team hit her with a defamation cease and desist before lunchtime." "Take a breath, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Do not let anyone post a single comment. Nobody engages. Nobody defends our brand. I want complete and total radio silence from our entire organization." "But she is humiliating us on a public platform," Marcus protested, the frustration clear in his tone. "People are going to think we are some amateur backyard operation. We cannot let her disrespect our hard work like this." "We are going to let her do exactly that," I replied, grabbing my car keys. "Arrogance is a drug, Marcus, and right now my sister is completely intoxicated. If we fight back, she might get defensive and look closer at who we actually are. We cannot afford to spook them before Saturday night. I need them to feel utterly invincible. Let her followers think whatever they want. On Saturday night, the food will speak for itself, and by Sunday morning, no one in Atlanta will care about her little video because she will be too busy explaining to the authorities where her husband hid the stolen pension funds. I am heading to the prep kitchen now. Keep the staff focused on the menu." I drove to our primary commercial kitchen facility in Midtown. When I walked through the double stainless steel doors, the tension in the room was palpable. My staff of 40 culinary experts was moving with robotic efficiency, their faces tight with suppressed anger. They took immense pride in the empire we had built together, and Kierra treating them like a charity case was a massive insult. I stood at the head of the main prep station and clapped my hands twice. Every head turned toward me. The chopping and searing came to a sudden halt. "I know you all saw the video," I announced, my voice carrying across the massive industrial kitchen. "I know you are angry. You should be. But we do not fight petty social media battles. We destroy our enemies through absolute excellence. We are going to execute a flawless Michelin-level service this Saturday. I want the Wagyu beef seared to absolute perfection. I want the gold leaf truffles plated with microscopic precision. I want the champagne towers flowing without a single drop spilled. We are not just feeding 500 wealthy guests. We are setting the stage for the greatest downfall this city has ever witnessed. We will give them a taste of true perfection right before the bottom drops out. Do I make myself clear? Yes, boss, the entire kitchen responded in unison, the tension instantly transforming into hyper-focused determination. I spent the next 6 hours walking the line inspecting every single detail of our prep work. I tasted the caviar. I checked the temperature logs for the imported seafood. I reviewed the uniform specifications, ensuring every server would look immaculate. I was not going to let my brand suffer just because I was serving criminals. My reputation was built on flawless execution, and I refused to compromise that standard for anyone. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was Kierra again, pushing her luck to the absolute limit. I hope you saw my video, she wrote. I generated a lot of good publicity for you. You are welcome, by the way. Also, Preston wants to make sure you use cheap ingredients for the staff meals. We are not wasting foundation money on feeding your cooks. Remember your place, Zariah? I stared at the screen, marveling at her relentless cruelty. I smiled and slowly exhaled as the plan finally took perfect shape. Attorney Davis walked into my office without knocking, holding her tablet like a weapon. She took a seat across from my desk and placed the device between us. He is bleeding out, boss, she said, her voice sharp and clinical. Preston just hit the panic button. I leaned forward, folding my hands. Tell me everything. He just realized that the catering deposit was not his only bounced check. Attorney Davis explained, swiping across the screen to reveal a web of banking alerts. 3 of his earliest investors just threatened to go to the authorities if they do not receive their guaranteed quarterly dividends by tomorrow afternoon. He needs liquid cash immediately. Not next week, not after the gala, today. And since my parents already drained their life savings to feed his Ponzi scheme, he has run out of gullible family members to rob, I noted. Where is he turning for the money? Attorney Davis smiled a slow, predatory smile. He just submitted an emergency application for a $5 million bridge loan. He went to a private equity firm that specializes in high-risk rapid funding. He offered the projected donations from tomorrow night's charity gala as collateral. He is practically begging them to wire the funds before the banks close at 5:00 today. I looked at the name of the firm listed on the digital application, Apex Horizon Capital. I could not help the genuine laugh that escaped my chest. Preston Sterling, the supposed financial genius of Atlanta, was so blinded by his own arrogance and desperation that he failed to do a basic corporate background check on his lender. He was so used to relying on his white privilege and his country club connections that he assumed he could just bully his way into a $5 million lifeline. He had absolutely no idea that Apex Horizon Capital was a direct subsidiary of my primary real estate holding group. He was literally begging me for the money to save himself from the destruction I had orchestrated. String him along. I ordered, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Do not deny the application yet. I want him to sweat. Tell your loan officers to act incredibly optimistic. Tell them the approval is essentially guaranteed, but they need him to jump through a few administrative hoops first. Attorney Davis nodded, tapping rapidly on her tablet. What kind of hoops? Demand personal guarantees, I instructed. Make him sign documents pledging his personal assets, his cars, his offshore accounts, and his marital home. Demand expedited financial projections for his charity foundation. He is desperate, so he will forge those documents to satisfy the underwriter requirements. When he emails those forged documents across state lines, he will be committing federal wire fraud and bank fraud. We will add those charges directly to the FBI dossier. Consider it done, Attorney Davis said, standing up. We will keep him on the hook until the absolute last second. For the next 24 hours, I monitored Preston's frantic digital footprint from the comfort of my executive suite. It was a masterclass in watching a narcissist completely unravel. Our loan officers reported that he was calling every hour on the hour, his tone shifting violently between aggressive demands and pathetic pleading. He tried to pull rank. He tried to drop names of prominent politicians. When that failed, he tried to leverage Kierra's social media following, claiming his wife was a major Atlanta influencer who could bring massive publicity to the lending firm. It was pathetic. He was using the black woman he married as a human shield to protect his fraudulent white-collar empire. By Friday afternoon, the pressure inside the Sterling mansion must have been suffocating. I received a forwarded audio file from one of my private investigators who had legally tapped a business line Preston was using. I clicked play and listened to the chaos. "I do not care about the floral arrangements," Kierra Preston was screaming, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Do not ask me for another credit card. The primary card is frozen because of a security block. Just use your own money for the centerpieces." But Preston Kierra whined, her voice dripping with spoiled entitlement. "The florist will not deliver the white orchids unless they get paid today. And I am not using my own money. You told me the foundation covers all event expenses. Why are you acting like this? You are ruining my mood for tomorrow." Preston let out a guttural sound of pure rage. "I am trying to save our entire lives, Kierra. Just shut up and let me handle the finances." The recording clicked off. I smiled, resting my chin on my hands. The golden couple was finally cracking. The fake royalty of Atlanta was eating each other alive over a frozen credit card. At exactly 4:55 on Friday afternoon, 5 minutes before the banking wire window officially closed, I gave Attorney Davis the green light. I sat in my office and listened in on the conference call as my lead underwriter delivered the final blow. Mr. Sterling, the underwriter, said, his voice professionally detached. "I am calling regarding your $5 million bridge loan application." Finally, Preston gasped, breathless and desperate. "Just authorize the wire transfer. I have given you every single document you asked for. The personal guarantees, the foundation projections, everything. Wire the money now." "I apologize, Mr. Sterling," the underwriter continued smoothly, "but our compliance department just completed a final review of your submitted documents. We found severe irregularities in your collateral claims. The financial projections for the Sterling Foundation appear to be entirely fabricated. Furthermore, your secondary asset profiles show massive liabilities that were not disclosed on your initial application." There was a dead silence on the line. I could practically hear Preston's heart stop beating. "What are you saying?" Preston whispered, his arrogance completely stripped away. "I am saying your application is denied, Mr. Sterling. Apex Horizon Capital will not be extending you a line of credit. We are also legally obligated to flag these fraudulent documents in the federal banking database. Have a good evening." "Wait!" Preston screamed, pure terror ripping through his voice. "Wait! You cannot do this. I will lose everything. Please, you do not understand." The underwriter disconnected the call, leaving Preston screaming into the digital void. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the sprawling Atlanta skyline as the sun began to set. The financial chokehold was complete. Preston had zero capital. He had zero lifelines. He was backed completely into a corner, surrounded by angry investors and looming federal audits. He had only one option left. He had to walk into that gala tomorrow night and attempt to steal enough donation money to flee the country. He had to put on a tuxedo, look my sister in the eye, and pretend he was the king of the world while his empire burned to the ground. And I was going to be right there, serving the champagne when the ashes finally fell. My phone screen lit up, illuminating the dark interior of my office. It was a text message from Kierra, arriving just 24 hours before the heavy mahogany doors of the Obsidian estate were scheduled to open. I unlocked the screen and read the paragraph of demands she had typed out. Her financial desperation was bleeding heavily through her usual arrogance. "Listen to me very carefully, Zariah," she wrote. "You are going to wear a generic black uniform. You will use the service elevator exclusively. You will not make eye contact with my guests. You will not speak unless spoken to, and you will only refer to me as Mrs. Sterling. You are the help for tomorrow night. If you step out of line, I will have Preston's security physically throw you out into the street. Do not embarrass me." I read the message twice. It was a pathetic attempt to assert dominance from a woman who was currently living on borrowed time and stolen money. She was clinging to the illusion of superiority because it was the only currency she had left in her bankrupt life. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I typed a single word in response. Understood. Early Saturday morning, I drove to the Obsidian estate to oversee the final preparations. The humid Atlanta air was already thick, but inside the grand ballroom, the industrial climate control kept the atmosphere perfectly crisp. The estate was a breathtaking monument to extreme wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private lake, and the vaulted ceilings were adorned with gold leaf detailing. My elite event staff was already moving with synchronized military precision. The crystal glasses were polished until they gleamed. The silver cutlery was aligned perfectly on the heavy imported linen tablecloths. I called my head of security, Darius, to the center of the ballroom. Darius was a towering, broad-shouldered black man who had run personal protection for foreign dignitaries before I hired him to oversee my entire commercial real estate portfolio. I handed him a digital tablet containing a highly classified operational timeline. Tonight is not a standard charity event, Darius, I explained, keeping my voice low and authoritative. The man hosting this gala, Preston Sterling, is currently under federal investigation for running a massive Ponzi scheme. He intends to use this event to defraud these affluent guests one last time before taking their money and fleeing the country. He believes he is in total control of this building. He is not. Darius reviewed the timeline, his expression remaining completely stoic. "What are the engagement parameters, boss?" he asked, his eyes scanning the ballroom exits. "Preston has his own private security team working the front doors," I noted. "Let them think they are running the perimeter. Do not engage them. But I want your men positioned silently at every service exit, every back hallway, and the underground parking garage." At exactly 9 o'clock tonight, a team of federal agents from the FBI and the IRS will arrive at the main gates. Attorney Davis has already provided them with the master access codes. When they arrive, your men will stand down and allow them immediate entry. Do not interfere with the federal raid. Just ensure the absolute safety of my catering staff and lock down the perimeter so Preston cannot slip out through the kitchens. "Understood," Boss Darius said, clipping his radio to his belt. "Nobody leaves this property until the feds have them in handcuffs." Next, I walked over to the audio-visual booth, perched on a balcony above the ballroom floor. My lead technician was running color diagnostics on the massive 30-foot LED screen dominating the main stage. Preston had provided a flashy, highly emotional video highlighting his fake charity work. The video was engineered to guilt the wealthy donors into opening their checkbooks and handing over their pensions. I handed the technician a heavily encrypted flash drive. At 8:45, Preston will take the stage to give his keynote address, I instructed. He will cue his promotional charity video. You will let his video play for exactly 30 seconds, so he feels incredibly secure. Then you will cut his feed entirely and broadcast the contents of this drive. The drive contains his offshore bank statements, his bounced checks, and the actual wire transfers showing him funneling community development funds into his personal accounts. Do not stop playing it until the authorities are physically inside the room. Finally, I walked down the marble stairs to the commercial kitchens. Chef Marcus was inspecting a line of perfectly seared Wagyu beef appetizers. The rich, earthy smell of black truffles filled the air. Marcus looked up as I approached, his face still tight with residual anger over Kierra's social media video, calling them a struggling hustle. "Serve them absolute perfection, Marcus," I ordered, inspecting a tray of caviar blinis. "I want the champagne glasses full at all times. I want the service to be seamless and entirely invisible. Preston and Kierra need to feel like they are hosting the greatest high society party in Atlanta history. We are going to elevate them to the very top of the mountain, so the fall breaks every single bone in their fake empire." My phone rang loudly, cutting through the rhythmic clatter of the kitchen. It was my mother, Brenda. I answered the call and put it on speakerphone so Chef Marcus could hear the astonishing level of delusion we were dealing with. "Zariah, you better not embarrass us tonight," Brenda snapped without any form of greeting. I remember how you ruined your sister's sweet 16 party because you refused to mingle with the right people. We have actual politicians and real estate moguls attending tonight. Keep your head down and make sure the food is not cold. Preston is already stressed enough managing his massive financial investments. Do not add to our burden with your usual incompetent behavior. I looked at Marcus, who was gripping a stainless steel prep table, his knuckles turning white. Do not worry, Mother, I replied, my voice completely smooth and sweet. I assure you my presence tonight will be the absolute highlight of Preston's entire career. You will all get exactly what you paid for. Good, Brenda huffed, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. Maybe if you do this right, Preston will finally let you invest a few $100s in his starter fund. You might actually learn how to build real generational wealth. She hung up the phone with a sharp click. Chef Marcus shook his head, letting out a low, disbelieving whistle. They really have absolutely no idea who they are talking to, do they, boss? No, Marcus, they do not, I said, turning to look back at the grand ballroom through the swinging kitchen doors. They still think I am the helpless 19-year-old girl they abandoned in an empty house. But the sun is going down, and their wealthy guests are about to arrive. The stage is set. The trap is perfectly loaded. All we have to do now is open the doors and watch them step inside. The heavy brass handles of the obsidian estate turned, and the massive mahogany doors swung wide open. The Atlanta night immediately filled with the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras and the low hum of expensive engines. A fleet of sleek black vehicles began wrapping around the circular driveway. Valets in crisp white jackets rushed to open the doors of arriving Maybachs and Bentleys. The Sterling Foundation Gala had officially begun. I stood in the shadows of the upper mezzanine, watching the grand foyer fill with the city's absolute elite. The guest list was a who is who of Atlanta royalty. There were state senators, tech billionaires, real estate moguls, and the leaders of the most prominent black megachurches in the South. They filed into the magnificent space, marveling at the soaring ceilings and the aggressive floral arrangements Preston had demanded. At the base of the grand double staircase stood my sister. Kierra was playing her role with sickening perfection. She wore a backless emerald green gown that swept the marble floor, but it was her jewelry that caught the light from every chandelier. A massive diamond collar rested against her collarbone, with matching teardrop earrings that swung as she laughed. I looked at those diamonds and felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. I knew exactly how they were purchased. Those jewels were paid for by the liquidated retirement funds of retired school teachers and the drained savings of my own parents. Kierra paraded the stolen wealth of our community around her neck, greeting the mayor with an air of absolute superiority. A few feet away, Preston was working the room like a seasoned predator. He looked impeccable in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his blonde hair slicked back, his smile perfectly calibrated to exude trust and financial dominance. I watched as he shook hands with a prominent bishop, patting the older man on the shoulder, while a foundation assistant discreetly collected a massive sealed envelope. Preston was actively gathering donation checks right there in the foyer. He was securing the stolen funds he needed to board a private jet by midnight. His charm was lethal. He laughed at their jokes, promised them astronomical returns on community developments that did not exist, and smoothly moved to the next wealthy target. Over by the champagne tower, I spotted my parents. Brenda and David were holding court with a group of local politicians. Brenda was wearing a designer dress that I knew cost more than her former monthly salary. She was pointing proudly at Preston, gesturing to the lavish surroundings, as if she had built them herself. She was soaking in the borrowed prestige, entirely oblivious to the fact that her mortgage had been defaulted on just hours prior. They were drinking expensive champagne on the deck of a sinking ship. I turned away from the foyer and walked down the concealed back staircase into the massive commercial kitchen. The heat and kinetic energy of the space hit me immediately. Chef Marcus was conducting his staff like a symphony orchestra. Waiters in sharp, unmarked black uniforms, as Kierra had demanded, were lining up to take the first round of appetizers out to the floor. Silver trays were loaded with beluga caviar on buckwheat blinis and perfectly seared Wagyu beef topped with shaved black truffles. I had spared absolutely no expense. The food was not just good, it was transcendent. I knew exactly how elite crowds operated. Exceptional food lowers their defenses. It makes them feel pampered, secure, and generous. I was weaponizing my culinary excellence to make Preston look like an absolute king. The more magnificent the event appeared, the deeper the guests would open their wallets, and the harder Preston would crash when the illusion shattered. Through the swinging kitchen doors, I could hear the muffled sounds of the gala. The string quartet played softly over the hum of wealthy conversation. Every time a server returned to the kitchen, they brought back glowing reports. The mayor was raving about the imported champagne. The investors were complimenting the extraordinary quality of the Wagyu. Preston was actively taking credit for all of it, telling everyone he had personally curated the menu to honor their generosity. He was riding the wave of my hard work, absorbing the prestige I had created. Suddenly, the kitchen doors swung open with violent force. Kierra marched in her emerald gown, trailing behind her like a royal cape. The kitchen staff froze, their eyes darting toward her. She ignored them completely, marching straight toward where I stood near the plating station. She looked me up and down, her diamond necklace glittering under the harsh, fluorescent kitchen lights. Her face twisted into a mask of pure condescension. "The food is acceptable," Zariah Kierra snapped, keeping her voice low but razor-sharp. "Preston is very pleased with how the event is making him look. Just remember what I told you. Do not let your staff linger in the ballroom. Tell them to clear the plates and disappear, and you stay back here entirely. The governor just arrived, and I will not have my sister smelling like cooking grease and embarrassing me in front of the press." I looked at her perfectly manicured nails and the stolen diamonds resting on her chest. She was so consumed by her fabricated superiority that she could not see the massive steel trap closing around her ankles. She thought she was the queen of Atlanta. She had absolutely no idea she was completely bankrupt. I gave her a polite, submissive nod. "Of course, Kierra. I will stay entirely out of sight. The kitchen will remain invisible. We want tonight to be a perfect reflection of Preston's actual business practices." She smiled a smug, self-satisfied grin, completely missing the double meaning of my words. "See that you do. I have to go secure a $50,000 donation check from a real estate developer. Keep the champagne flowing." Kierra spun on her heels and marched out of the kitchen, the doors swinging shut behind her. Chef Marcus walked over to me, wiping his hands on a clean towel. His eyes were burning with suppressed anger. "How much longer, boss?" he asked, his voice a tight whisper. "How much longer do we let them treat us like this?" I checked the platinum watch on my wrist. The first course was nearly finished. The crowd was thoroughly intoxicated by the luxury, and Preston was preparing to make his way to the main stage for his grand keynote speech. The timing was absolutely perfect. "Just a few more minutes, Marcus," I replied, unbuttoning my white chef coat to reveal the edge of my own preparation. "Keep the staff in the kitchen and lock down the service corridors. I have an outfit change to make. It is time for the main course." I left the kitchen and headed toward my private suite on the top floor of the estate. Preston had charmed the investors. Kierra had flaunted her stolen diamonds. My parents had bragged about their non-existent wealth. The facade was flawless. But the curtain was about to fall, and I was ready to take center stage. The red carpet was over. The real show was about to begin. My driver pulled the custom Maybach around the circular driveway of the Obsidian estate, bypassing the long line of idling luxury vehicles. The heavy tires crunched against the gravel, drawing the immediate attention of the press corps clustered behind the velvet ropes, hoping to catch a glimpse of Atlanta billionaires arriving for Preston's highly publicized charity gala. When my personal security detail opened the heavy car door, I stepped out into the humid night air, and the flashing bulbs created an almost blinding strobe effect. I was not wearing the generic black caterer uniform my sister had demanded. I was draped in a custom emerald and gold Tom Ford evening gown. The silk cascaded down my silhouette, projecting absolute unapologetic authority. The dress alone cost $15,000, and it commanded the exact level of respect I required for this execution. I walked up the marble steps feeling the heavy gaze of the city elite locking onto me. Whispers immediately rippled through the gathered crowd. Several prominent real estate developers and corporate attorneys recognized me instantly from closed-door boardroom meetings. I saw a state senator I had recently funded tap his wife on the arm and point in my direction. The mayor of Atlanta, who was standing near the towering floral arches, gave me a discreet, respectful nod. They knew I was a commercial powerhouse who operated from the shadows. To them, I was the invisible hand that moved capital across the city. They had no idea I was related to the woman currently hosting the gala. I stepped over the threshold and entered the grand foyer. The soaring vaulted ceilings amplified the classical music, but it could not mask the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. I handed my silk wrap to an astonished attendant and grabbed a glass of vintage champagne from a passing silver tray. Halfway across the foyer, standing on the landing of the sweeping dual staircase, was my sister Kierra. She was making small talk with potential investors, her face frozen in a practiced plastic smile. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne and locked eyes with her from across the vast marble floor. I watched the exact second her brain processed my presence. The champagne glass in her hand tilted precariously, spilling a few drops of expensive liquor onto a wealthy pastor standing beside her. Her eyes darted from my face down to the Tom Ford gown and back up again. The smug superiority she had worn like a crown all night instantly dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her lips parted in shock as she realized I had completely defied her orders. I was not cowering in the service elevator. I was standing in the center of her defining moment, looking far more expensive and powerful than she could ever hope to be. Kierra thrust the microphone into the hands of a bewildered coordinator and grabbed the banister. She aggressively descended the staircase, her emerald gown dragging behind her. She moved with frantic, uncoordinated speed, entirely abandoning the graceful socialite persona she had carefully curated for the cameras. She scanned the crowd and locked eyes with our mother Brenda, who was busy bragging to a local judge near the coat check. Kierra pointed a trembling finger in my direction. Brenda turned and her jaw practically unhinged. The color drained completely from my mother's face, before flushing a deep, violent red. The two of them converged, moving like heat-seeking missiles through the sea of tuxedos and designer dresses. They shoved past several high-net-worth donors as they bulldozed their way toward the center of the foyer, where I stood calmly admiring a crystal chandelier. I did not retreat. I stood my ground, planting my heels firmly into the marble. 12 years ago, I would have shied away from their furious stares. I would have looked for an exit, terrified of the impending verbal abuse and the inevitable public humiliation. But the terrified 19-year-old girl they abandoned with a sticky note was dead and buried. I had forged myself into a weapon of precision, and I was entirely immune to their petty intimidation tactics. I took another slow sip of my champagne, watching them navigate the crowded room. I could see the frantic whispering between them as they closed the distance. Brenda was frantically trying to keep a polite smile plastered on her face for the sake of the surrounding politicians, but her eyes were burning with toxic maternal fury. Kierra looked like she was ready to commit murder. They finally breached the inner circle of the foyer, isolating me near a massive marble pillar. They moved in close, attempting to block me from the view of the more important guests. They wanted to corral me, to force me back into the invisible box they had constructed for me. But I simply smiled, looking down at both of them. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" Kierra hissed, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper that she desperately tried to conceal from the nearby guests. Her chest heaved with panicked breaths, and she glared at my dress with a mixture of intense jealousy and absolute hatred. "I told you to stay in the back. I gave you explicit instructions to wear a uniform and use the service corridors. Who do you think you are showing up to my event dressed like this?" Brenda stepped up right beside her daughter, reinforcing the attack. "You are completely out of your mind, Zariah." My mother seethed, her tone dripping with that familiar, condescending authority. You stole a designer dress to come out here and make a spectacle of yourself. You are trying to sabotage your sister on the most important night of Preston's career. You are a caterer. You are the help. I am exactly where I belong, Kierra. I said, my voice smooth, resonant, and utterly terrifying in its calm. And mother, I do not steal. I own. I own this dress. I own my business. And you are about to find out exactly what else I own. The moment the words left my lips, my mother lost whatever fragile grip she had on her sanity. The veins in her neck strained against her pearl choker. She lunged forward, her manicured hand clamping down violently on my bare bicep. Her acrylic nails dug into my skin with the desperate, frantic strength of a woman watching her absolute control evaporate. She yanked my arm, trying to physically drag me toward the shadowed alcove near the cloakroom, away from the prying eyes of the politicians and real estate moguls sipping their champagne just a few feet away. How dare you steal a designer dress and show up here to humiliate your sister? Brenda hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic frequency. Her breath smelled of expensive wine and blind panic. You are going to turn around, walk out that service door, and take this stolen gown back to whichever department store you shoplifted it from before Preston sees you and calls the police. You are nothing but a caterer. You do not belong in the same room as these people. 12 years ago, that physical aggression would have paralyzed me. I would have folded into myself, apologized, and quietly slipped out the back door to cry in my car. But I was no longer her victim. I was the apex predator in this room. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. Instead, I raised my free hand and clamped my fingers around her wrist. I locked my grip over her pulse point, applying a swift, calculated pressure directly to the nerve. It was a self-defense technique my head of security, Darius, had taught me years ago. I did not break my polite social smile, but I squeezed until my mother let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Her fingers instantly uncurled from my arm, her face twisting in sudden agonizing pain. I stepped directly into her personal space, towering over her in my heels. Touch me again. I whispered, my voice lethal and cold as ice, and I will have you arrested for battery right here in front of the mayor. Brenda stumbled back, cradling her wrist against her chest. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, completely unable to comprehend the physical and emotional dominance I had just exerted. She looked around, frantically terrified that the high society guests had witnessed her being overpowered by the daughter she had deemed worthless. Are you completely insane? Kierra shrieked, stepping forward to shield our mother. She glanced nervously at a group of tech investors standing near the ice sculpture. You just assaulted our mother. I am calling the police. I am having you thrown into a squad car. Call them, Kierra, I challenged, taking a step toward her. Call the police right now. In fact, let us invite them directly into the grand foyer. I'm sure the federal authorities would love to have a conversation with you about the specific origin of those diamonds around your neck. Because we both know Preston did not buy those with his legitimate salary. Kierra froze. The threat of public exposure paralyzed her. Her hand instinctively flew up to cover her diamond necklace, a telltale sign of her own deep-seated insecurities. She knew Preston's finances were tight, but her greed prevented her from asking the hard questions. She preferred the comfortable lie. You are sick, Brenda sputtered, still rubbing her wrist. You come into a high-class charity event and resort to violence just like a street thug. We gave you an opportunity to work tonight to make a few honest dollars, and this is how you repay us. You are trying to sabotage the Sterling Foundation out of pure, bitter jealousy. I smoothed out the sleeve of my Tom Ford gown, ensuring not a single crease remained from her desperate grip. I am not jealous of a sinking ship, Mother. I am just here to watch it drown. You grabbed me because you are terrified. You thought putting me in a generic uniform and shoving me in a commercial kitchen would keep me invisible. But you forgot one very important detail about the service industry. The people pouring the drinks and serving the food hear absolutely everything. What are you talking about? Kierra demanded, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. She kept looking over my shoulder, searching the crowd for Preston. He was currently trapped in a conversation with a prominent state senator, completely unaware that his wife and mother-in-law were currently losing a psychological war in the foyer. I leaned in close enough to smell the fear sweating through Kierra's expensive perfume. I am talking about the fact that your husband bounced the $100,000 deposit check for this venue 48 hours ago. I am talking about the fact that this entire charity gala is a massive fraud designed to rob these pastors and politicians blind before the SEC freezes his accounts on Monday morning. I am talking about the fact that your perfect white knight is a common thief. Kierra let out a harsh, breathless laugh, but her eyes darted frantically. You are a liar. Preston manages a $100 million portfolio. He just secured a massive bridge loan yesterday. We are expanding our philanthropic reach. You are just making up insane conspiracy theories because you cannot handle the fact that I married a winner and you ended up alone. Brenda nodded aggressively, backing up her golden child. Preston is a financial genius. He has personally doubled my retirement savings this year alone. He is securing our family legacy while you are out here making a fool of yourself in a stolen dress. I will not listen to another word of this jealous poison. A bridge loan, I repeated, savoring the absolute irony of the moment. You mean the $5 million emergency loan he begged for from Apex Horizon Capital? The one that was categorically denied at 4:55 yesterday afternoon due to massive fraudulent irregularities in his application. Kierra's mouth snapped shut. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. She knew about the loan. Preston must have told her it was a guaranteed deal to keep her quiet about the frozen credit cards. How do you know the name of that firm? Kierra whispered, her voice cracking. Because I own it, Kierra. I replied, my tone completely devoid of mercy. I own Apex Horizon Capital. I am the one who personally ordered my underwriters to deny his application. Your husband is entirely broke. And mother, that retirement fund you think he is doubling was drained dry the second you wired it to his offshore accounts. You handed your entire life savings to a con artist because you wanted to look rich at a country club. That is impossible! Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. Her eyes darted wildly around the opulent room, suddenly seeing the luxury not as a status symbol, but as an impending prison sentence. We signed official documents. We have statements. You have worthless pieces of paper printed from a fake holding company, I corrected her smoothly. You chose prestige over your own daughter 12 years ago. You chose a sticky note and a locked door. Tonight, you finally get to pay the bill for that choice. Kierra shook her head aggressively, refusing to let her fabricated reality shatter. No, you are lying. You are a caterer. You do not own a private equity firm. You do not own anything. You are just trying to scare us. Preston is going to fix this. He always fixes this. I stepped back, giving them a final sweeping look of utter pity. Then by all means, Kierra, go find your husband. Tell him the girl from the kitchen knows exactly what he is hiding. Tell him to enjoy his champagne while it lasts. Because the main course is about to be served, and I guarantee it will be the hardest thing he has ever had to swallow. I turned on my heel, my emerald silk gown trailing elegantly across the polished marble floor. I did not look back. I walked straight past the trembling golden child, and the mother who had thrown me away, melting seamlessly into the crowd of billionaires and politicians. The trap was locked. There was absolutely no escape. All I had to do now was wait for the music to stop. Kierra let out a shrill, hysterical laugh that sounded more like a screech. She looked at me as if my brain had completely snapped in half. You own a frying pan and a few spatulas, Zariah. You are trespassing at a private charity gala hosted by the most influential financial firm in the state. I am not playing this delusional game with you for one more second. She whipped her head around, scanning the crowded foyer. Her diamond earrings swung violently as she spotted the venue general manager standing near the coat check. His name was Harrison, a strict, older white man with a reputation for running the most exclusive properties in Atlanta with an iron fist. Kierra snapped her fingers at him aggressively, beckoning him over like a disobedient dog. Harrison, get over here right now! Kierra shouted, her voice cutting through the elegant string quartet playing in the background. The wealthy guests nearest to us fell silent, turning their heads to watch the unfolding drama. Harrison immediately abandoned his conversation with a valet and marched across the marble floor. He moved with the rigid authority of a man accustomed to catering to billionaires and ejecting crashers without a second thought. Kierra crossed her arms over her chest, wearing a triumphant, vicious smirk. She looked at my mother, who was still massaging her wrist, and gave a firm nod. "Watch how the real world works," Brenda, Kierra said loudly, ensuring the donors nearby could hear her asserting dominance. "We do not have to tolerate this kind of ghetto behavior at a high-class event." Harrison arrived at our circle, stopping a respectful distance away. His posture was impeccable. "Harrison, this caterer has completely lost her mind," Kierra commanded, pointing her finger directly at my face. She abandoned her post in the kitchen, stole a guest gown, and assaulted my mother. "I want her physically removed from my event this instant. Throw her out into the street and make sure she never sets foot on this property again." My mother stood taller, finding her false courage now that she believed reinforcements had arrived. "And call the police," Brenda added, her voice trembling with manufactured victimhood. "I want to press charges for trespassing and assault." I did not break my stance. I simply turned my gaze to Harrison. I waited for the exact moment he realized who he was looking at. I rarely visited my properties in person, preferring to handle acquisitions through my blind trusts and corporate attorneys. But Harrison and I had a very specific, very intensive video conference when I purchased the Obsidian estate 30 days ago. I had retained his employment under strict new operational guidelines. Harrison looked at Kierra, his expression entirely blank. Then he slowly turned his head toward me. The authoritative, rigid posture he held for Kierra instantly vanished. He took a deliberate step forward and bowed deeply from the waist, a perfect 90-degree angle of absolute submission. "Good evening, Boss Harrison," said his voice carrying clearly over the hushed whispers of the surrounding crowd. "Is there a problem here? Should I have my security team remove these guests from your property?" The absolute dead silence that blanketed the foyer was deafening. It was as if all the oxygen had been instantly vacuumed out of the room. Kierra staggered backward a full step. Her stiletto heel caught on the edge of a marble tile, and she nearly twisted her ankle. She stared at Harrison, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. Brenda clutched the fabric of her expensive dress, her eyes wide with a terror that was entirely authentic. "What did you just say?" Kierra gasped, her voice a weak, trembling whisper. "What did you just call her?" Harrison straightened his posture and looked at my sister with pure professional disdain. "I called her Boss Madam. Zariah Washington is the sole proprietor of the holding company that purchased the Obsidian estate last month. She owns the building, the grounds, the catering company, and the very floor you are currently standing on. Now, I will ask you again, boss, would you like me to have them escorted out?" I looked at my mother and my sister, watching their entire fabricated reality shatter into a million jagged pieces. The psychological devastation on their faces was a masterpiece. For 12 years, they had built their identities around the belief that I was beneath them. They had justified abandoning me at 19 by convincing themselves I was a worthless burden who would never amount to anything. They had paraded around Atlanta pretending to be royalty while looking down their noses at my honest work. And in one single sentence from an older white man, they deemed their social superior. The truth crushed them. They realized I was not just successful, I was astronomically, breathtakingly wealthy. I possessed the kind of quiet institutional power that their flashy new money lifestyle could not even begin to comprehend. "You own the estate," Brenda choked out the words, scraping against her throat. Her eyes darted wildly around the towering columns and gold leaf ceilings. "How? How could you possibly afford a place like this? You wash dishes." "I build empires, Mother," I corrected her, my tone smooth and lethal. "I spent the last decade acquiring commercial real estate while you and Kierra were busy going into debt to buy designer handbags. You wanted me to be the help tonight, so I decided to play along. I wanted to see exactly how you treat people when you think you hold all the power." Kierra shook her head violently, refusing to accept the massive shift in the hierarchy. No, this is a trick. Preston rented this venue. We have a contract. We paid for this space. You cannot just come in here and threaten to kick us out of our own charity gala." Preston is a financial titan. He will buy this building from you just to fire you. I signaled for Harrison to step back. I took a slow, deliberate step toward Kierra, closing the distance until I could see my own reflection in her terrified eyes. I reached into the sleek Tom Ford clutch at my side. That is the fascinating part about contracts, Kierra, I said softly, pulling out a folded piece of laminated paper. They require actual currency to be valid. You have been walking around this foyer all night, flaunting diamonds and bragging about your husband's vast wealth. You thought you could use this event to humiliate me. You thought you were the Queen of Atlanta. I held the laminated document up right in front of her face. It was the certified bank notice Attorney Davis had given me. But a queen does not bounce her checks, I continued, my voice slicing through her remaining dignity. Your husband's $100,000 deposit for this venue was returned due to insufficient funds 48 hours ago. You did not pay for this space, Kierra. You are currently trespassing on my private property. Kierra stared at the bright red banking stamp on the document. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. The illusion of her perfect marriage was cracking wide open. But I am not going to throw you out, I said, a cold smile spreading across my lips. Because Preston has a very important presentation to give on that stage. And I want to make sure every single investor in this room sees exactly who he really is before the night is over. Before Kierra could even process my threat, the crowd parted again. Preston had finally noticed his wife and mother-in-law frozen in terror next to the woman they were supposed to be hiding in the kitchen. He marched over his custom leather shoes, clicking sharply against my marble floor. He adjusted his silk tie, projecting the arrogant authority of a man who firmly believed his skin color and his bank account made him untouchable. What is the problem here? Preston demanded, his voice dripping with annoyance. He completely ignored me, focusing his attention on Harrison, the venue manager. I thought we agreed the catering staff would remain out of sight. Why is she standing in the grand foyer disrupting my guests? Harrison did not flinch. He looked at Preston with icy professional detachment. She is not the catering staff, sir. She is the owner of this estate. Preston stopped dead in his tracks. His arrogant sneer faltered for a fraction of a second, but his massive ego quickly overrode his logic. He looked me up and down, taking in the expensive gown. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh. So, you bought the building. Big deal. You probably leveraged every penny of your little cooking business to get a predatory loan. It does not matter if your name is on the deed, Zariah. I signed a legally binding contract for this venue, and I paid the rental fee in full. You cannot legally throw us out. In fact, I could sue you for breach of contract and emotional distress for harassing my wife. Now take your ridiculous dress and get out of my sight before I ruin you. I did not blink. I reached into my clutch and slowly pulled out a folded laminated document. I held it up between two fingers, letting the heavy cardstock catch the light of the chandelier above us. I stepped right into Preston's personal space, forcing him to look down at the bright red banking stamp stamped across the top of the page. Actually, Preston, your $100,000 deposit check bounced 48 hours ago. I said, my voice carrying a lethal calm that made the surrounding guests lean in closer. Your primary accounts are overdrawn. Your secondary accounts are frozen. You did not pay for this venue. You are currently trespassing on my private property. Preston stared at the laminated bank notice. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He recognized the specific routing numbers printed on the page. He knew I was not bluffing. The absolute certainty that his financial house of cards was collapsing hit him like a freight train. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Kierra grabbed his arm, her diamond bracelets clinking. Preston, tell her she is lying. Kierra pleaded, her voice thick with rising panic. Tell her we paid for this. Tell her about the $5 million bridge loan you secured yesterday. I smiled, looking directly into Preston's terrified blue eyes. Yes, Preston. Tell your beautiful wife about the emergency bridge loan you begged for from Apex Horizon Capital. Tell her how you offered fraudulent charity projections as collateral. Tell her how the underwriter denied your application at 4:55 yesterday afternoon. Because I own Apex Horizon Capital, Preston. I am the one who personally ordered my team to reject your fraudulent application. You have absolutely nothing left. You are entirely broke. Preston began to sweat. Beads of moisture gathered on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled appearance. He looked around the room, frantically realizing that the high net worth donors he needed to scam were standing just a few feet away, watching his humiliation unfold. He leaned in close, dropping the polite society facade entirely. His voice became a vicious, desperate hiss. "Listen to me, you bitter piece of trash!" Preston growled, leaning so close I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "I am inches away from securing $20 million in donations tonight. These people trust me. They do not care about you or your real estate acquisitions. If you walk away right now and let me finish my presentation, I will cut you a check for $500,000 by Monday morning. I will make you rich. But if you ruin this for me, I swear to God, I will take you down with me." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "You cannot buy my silence with money you do not have, Preston. And you certainly cannot threaten a woman who holds every single one of your financial records in a federal dossier. You think you are a shark, but you are just a desperate man bleeding in my water. I could have my security team throw you out into the street right now. I could have you arrested for trespassing and watch the paparazzi take photos of you sitting on the curb in your custom tuxedo." Preston swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his collar. "Then why do you not do it?" He challenged, his voice shaking. "Why are you letting me stay?" I stepped back, giving him a clear path toward the grand ballroom. "Because, Preston, you have a very important presentation to give on that stage. You invited all these affluent black politicians and pastors here tonight to listen to your charity pitch. It would be incredibly rude to cancel on them now. You need their money to fuel your escape plan, do you not? So go ahead, walk onto that stage, give them the performance of a lifetime, sell them the dream." My mother Brenda stepped forward, grabbing Preston's shoulder. "Preston, do not listen to her. She wants you to fail because she has always been jealous of this family. Go secure the funding. We will deal with her trespassing accusations tomorrow with our lawyers." Preston looked at Brenda, then at Kierra, and finally back at me. His arrogance was a fatal disease. He genuinely believed that if he could just get to that microphone and secure those donation checks, he could wire the funds offshore and vanish before the authorities caught up with him. He straightened his tie, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "You will regret this, Zariah." Preston sneered, trying to summon a shred of his former authority. "I am going to walk onto that stage, and I am going to secure my legacy. And when I am done, I will make sure everyone in this city knows exactly how unstable you truly are." He turned on his heel and marched toward the ballroom doors, signaling for his audio-visual team to prepare his presentation. Kierra and Brenda shot me identical glares of pure venom before rushing after him, eager to stand in the spotlight of his impending victory. I watched them walk away, moving directly into the center of the slaughterhouse I had meticulously designed for them. I signaled my lead technician in the balcony. It was time for the show. Preston practically sprinted across the ballroom floor, shoving past waiters and high-net-worth donors in his desperate scramble to reach the main stage. His polished facade was fracturing under the weight of his impending ruin. He snatched the microphone from the stand with shaking hands, his knuckles turning stark white. He gestured aggressively at the string quartet to stop playing. The sudden silence in the cavernous ballroom caused a ripple of confusion among the 500 elite guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston projected into the microphone, his voice pitched a frantic octave higher than usual. "Thank you all for joining the Sterling Foundation tonight. We are facing unprecedented times in our community, and unprecedented times call for unprecedented generosity. I am bypassing our scheduled dinner program because the need is simply too urgent. We are starting the live auction right now." He paced the stage like a cornered animal, pointing directly at a prominent megachurch pastor seated at a front table. "Bishop Thomas, we spoke earlier about the new youth center," Preston demanded, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "I need to secure those funds tonight, right now. We are accepting immediate wire transfers and certified checks. Anyone who commits over $50,000 tonight gets premium placement on the foundation board. Let us not wait for tomorrow when we can change lives tonight." The audience exchanged uneasy glances. This was not how high society charity galas operated. The aggressive, desperate panhandling felt cheap and entirely inappropriate. Politicians shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Kierra stood frozen near the edge of the stage, her perfect hostess smile faltering as she watched her husband unravel. My mother Brenda clutched her champagne glass, looking around nervously as the prestige she craved began to sour into public embarrassment. Preston sensed he was losing the room. He needed his emotional manipulation tactic. He turned toward the audiovisual booth hovering above the ballroom floor. "Roll the presentation," Preston barked into the microphone, waving his free hand toward the massive 30-foot LED screen mounted behind him. "Look at the screen, folks. Look at the faces of the people you are helping. Roll the video now." From my position near the grand entryway, I locked eyes with my lead technician up in the balcony. I gave him one slow, deliberate nod. The massive crystal chandeliers dimmed, plunging the ballroom into a dramatic cinematic darkness. The 30-foot screen flashed to life, bathing the room in stark, bright white light. Preston turned his back to the audience, spreading his arms wide, expecting to hear soaring orchestral music and see professional footage of smiling children and newly built community centers. Instead, the screen displayed a massive, high-resolution image of a certified bank statement. There was no music. There was only the cold, hard reality of federal financial documents blown up to 30 feet tall. The account holder name read Preston Sterling. The balance at the bottom was printed in glaring red ink, displaying a negative deficit of over $2 million. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. "What is this?" Preston shouted, slapping the microphone against his thigh. "Turn it off. There is a glitch in the system. Shut the screen down right now." The screen did not shut down. The image transitioned with brutal efficiency. Now it displayed a highly detailed forensic accounting flowchart. The arrows traced hundreds of thousands of dollars moving directly from the prominent megachurch pension fund straight into a shadowy offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The name of the church was highlighted in bright yellow. Bishop Thomas stood up from his front row table, his chair scraping violently against the marble floor. "That is my congregation's retirement fund," the bishop shouted, his deep voice carrying across the entire room. "What is the meaning of this, Sterling? Where is our money?" Preston dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with an ear-splitting feedback screech that made half the room cover their ears. He scrambled toward the edge of the stage, screaming up at the AV booth, but his voice was drowned out by the rising chaos of the crowd. The presentation marched forward utterly merciless. The screen flashed to a series of scanned receipts and wire transfers. The documents detailed the purchase of a brand new Lamborghini, a luxury penthouse lease in Miami, and a $200,000 diamond collar necklace. Kierra stepped forward, her eyes wide with desperate confusion. She instinctively touched the heavy diamond collar resting against her own chest. She thought he had bought those diamonds for her. She thought she was wearing the spoils of his immense success. Then the final image slammed onto the screen. It was a high-definition photograph pulled directly from a private social media account. The photo showed the interior of the Miami penthouse. Sitting on a velvet sofa sipping expensive champagne was a young blonde woman. She was wearing the exact $200,000 diamond collar necklace listed on the stolen funds receipt. She was very clearly not Kierra. The caption below the photo read, "Celebrating our one-year anniversary with my amazing man." The ballroom erupted into absolute pandemonium. Investors were shouting, pulling out cell phones to frantically call their bankers. Politicians were sprinting toward the exits, desperate to distance themselves from a federal crime. Kierra let out a blood-curdling scream, cutting through the noise. She ripped the diamond necklace from her throat, realizing her jewels were likely cubic zirconia, cheap fakes meant to placate her. She hurled the fake necklace at Preston, her chest heaving with humiliation. Brenda collapsed into a chair, hyperventilating. She stared as offshore account numbers flashed past, matching the exact destination where she had wired her entire life savings days prior. I stood back in the shadows, perfectly still, watching the entire destruction unfold. I felt absolutely no pity. The long night was not over yet. The sheer volume of the panic was deafening. It sounded like a massive coordinated riot dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns. The heavy crystal glasses that my catering staff had meticulously polished were now shattering against the marble floors as guests dropped their drinks in absolute shock. The state senator who had just been laughing with Preston was now physically shoving his way past a line of waiters desperate to escape the flashing cameras of the local press who had sneaked into the back of the venue. Nobody wanted to be photographed standing next to a man who had just been exposed for stealing retirement funds from prominent black megachurches. Bishop Thomas was marching straight toward the stage, his face contorted with a righteous fury, demanding his congregation's money back. Preston scrambled backward, his perfectly tailored suit jacket now looking like a cheap straitjacket. Kierra stood absolutely paralyzed near the edge of the stage. The heavy fake diamond necklace she had hurled at Preston lay discarded on the polished wood floor, glittering with worthless synthetic light. She stared up at the 30-foot screen, watching the slideshow loop back to the photograph of the blonde mistress lounging in the Miami penthouse. For 34 years, Kierra had built her entire identity around being better than me. She had mocked my clothes, my business, and my life because she believed her proximity to Preston made her untouchable. She believed she was the ultimate prize. Now the brutal truth was broadcast in high definition for the entire city of Atlanta to see. She was never his equal. She was a convenient prop. He had used her deep connections within the affluent black community to find his wealthy targets. She was the Trojan horse he rode in on, and the second he got their money, he spent it on another woman. Preston reached out, trying to grab Kierra by the arm to pull her toward the backstage service exit. Kierra jerked her body away violently, as if his touch was radioactive. "Do not put your hands on me!" Kierra screamed, her voice raw and cracking. "You told me that Miami property was a corporate retreat. You told me those funds were locked in escrow. You bought her a $200,000 necklace while you froze my credit cards. You made me look like an absolute fool." Preston did not bother to offer an apology. The charming Southern gentleman routine completely vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating arrogance of a cornered predator. "Shut your mouth, Kierra, and get in the car," Preston hissed, his face twisting with unfiltered malice. "If I go down for this, I am taking you with me. Your signature is on half of those foundation documents. You are just as guilty as I am. You spent the stolen money just as fast as I did." Before Kierra could even process the threat of federal prison, a guttural wail ripped through the front of the ballroom. It came from my mother. Brenda was gripping the edge of a VIP table, her knees buckling beneath her. She was staring straight up at the massive LED screen as a new slide of forensic accounting data transitioned into view. It was a highly detailed breakdown of the most recent wire transfers injected into Preston's offshore accounts to keep the Ponzi scheme barely afloat. Right there in the center of the screen, illuminated in glaring white text, were the exact routing and account numbers of my parents' joint retirement fund. Next to it was the specific transaction ID for the second mortgage they had secretly taken out on their Alpharetta home. "David." My father pushed his way through the chaotic crowd, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen him display. He looked at the screen and then looked at the corresponding expense column. The $500,000 they had wired to Preston just 3 weeks ago had not been invested in a high-yield commercial property. The ledger clearly showed their life savings being immediately diverted to pay the outstanding lease on the mistress's penthouse and to settle Preston's massive gambling debts in Las Vegas. Every single penny they had worked 40 years to save was completely gone. The legacy they had bragged about at dinner was a total fabrication. They were entirely bankrupt. David stormed the stage, grabbing Preston by the lapels of his custom suit. "Where is my money?" David roared, his voice echoing over the screaming crowd. "You promised me guaranteed returns. You told Brenda our mortgage was perfectly leveraged. You give me my money back right now, you lying thief." Preston violently shoved my father backward. David stumbled, hitting the microphone stand and knocking it to the ground. Preston sneered, looking down at the man who had proudly called him a financial genius just hours earlier. "You greedy old fool," Preston spat, adjusting his jacket. "You handed me your money because you were desperate to pretend you were richer than you actually are. You wanted to buy your way into a higher tax bracket, and you were too stupid to read the fine print. Nobody forced you to sign over your house. You did that to yourselves because you wanted to show off to your country club friends." Brenda fell to the floor, weeping uncontrollably. The wealthy socialites she had been bragging to all evening were now staring down at her with unfiltered pity and disgust. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing about losing her home and her status. Kierra was hyperventilating, her perfect makeup ruined by streaks of black mascara. The golden child and her worshipping parents were completely shattered, destroyed by the very man they had placed on a pedestal. They had thrown me into the freezing rain 12 years ago because they thought I was a burden holding them back from greatness. Now they were drowning in a sea of public humiliation and absolute financial ruin. I stood near the marble entryway, my emerald silk gown immaculate, my posture perfectly straight. I watched them tear each other apart on that stage, recognizing that I did not even have to lift a finger to destroy them. They had built their own guillotine and gladly placed their heads on the block. The screaming continued to echo through the grand ballroom, but a new sound was quickly approaching from outside the estate walls. The high-pitched wail of federal sirens pierced the thick Atlanta night air. It started as a distant echo and rapidly amplified into a deafening roar that vibrated the stained glass windows of the grand ballroom. The screaming inside the venue abruptly stopped, replaced by a collective chilling realization. Pulsing red and blue lights began flashing through the sheer curtains, casting harsh, rapid shadows across the terrified faces of the city elite. Before Preston could even formulate a thought to run, the massive mahogany double doors of the ballroom burst violently open. A highly coordinated tactical unit of federal agents flooded into the venue. They wore dark windbreakers with thick yellow letters spelling out FBI and IRS Criminal Investigation Division across their backs. They moved with absolute military precision, fanning out to secure every exit, blocking the sprawling marble foyer and sealing off the catering corridors. Preston looked like a cornered rat. His arrogant swagger entirely vanished, replaced by the primal panic of a man who knew his empire was dead. He spun around, abandoning his weeping wife and frantic father-in-law, and bolted toward the backstage area. He shoved past a terrified event coordinator trying to reach the loading dock doors. I had explicitly ordered my security chief, Darius, to lock down 10 minutes prior. He never even made it to the curtain. 3 federal agents vaulted onto the main stage, cutting off his escape route. Preston threw his hands up, taking a clumsy, frantic step backward, but his expensive Italian leather shoes slipped on the polished wood floor. An agent tackled him, bringing his full body weight down on Preston. The impact echoed through the silent ballroom. The untouchable white finance bro who had threatened to ruin my catering business was now face down on the stage with a federal agent pressing a knee squarely between his shoulder blades. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists rang out with absolute finality. From the main entryway, Attorney Davis stepped into the ballroom. She looked immaculate in her tailored navy suit, holding a sleek leather folio. Walking right beside her was the lead federal agent, a tall, imposing black man, who surveyed the chaotic room with professional detachment. Attorney Davis had handed them the silver bullet. The dossier we compiled contained not just the bounced checks and offshore routing numbers, but the exact IP addresses Preston used to forge federal loan documents and wire stolen pension funds across international borders. It was a slam-dunk case of federal wire fraud and grand larceny that gave a judge zero hesitation in signing a midnight raid warrant. "Preston Sterling." The lead agent's voice boomed, carrying easily without a microphone. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and violating the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Preston thrashed helplessly against the floor, his pristine custom tuxedo jacket tearing at the shoulder seam. "This is a misunderstanding," Preston screamed, his voice cracking with utter desperation. I manage high-yield portfolios. My lawyers will have your badge on a desk by morning. You do not know who you are dealing with." The lead agent hauled Preston to his feet by the back of his collar, offering no gentle treatment. "We know exactly who we are dealing with, Mr. Sterling. A man who steals from church pensions to buy sports cars. The Securities and Exchange Commission has already frozen every single domestic and international account tied to your name. Your assets are seized." The remaining elite guests watched in absolute stunned silence. The state senators and wealthy real estate moguls pulled out their phones not to record, but to aggressively text their legal teams to immediately sever any ties to the Sterling Foundation. The few paparazzi who had managed to slip past the valet stand were having a field day. Camera flashes erupted in rapid succession, capturing every humiliating second of Preston's downfall. His face was bright red, slick with sweat, and contorted in pure panic. Kierra stood just a few feet away, trembling violently. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her. The federal agents were not just arresting her husband, they were confiscating the illusion she had sacrificed her own sister to build. She looked down at her hands, realizing the massive diamond ring on her finger was purchased with stolen money and would soon be seized as federal evidence. "Preston, my mother!" Brenda wailed, pushing past my paralyzed father David to reach the edge of the stage. "You have to fix this. Tell them about the offshore accounts. Tell them where our mortgage money went. You promised us generational wealth." Preston glared down at my mother with a look of pure, unfiltered hatred. "I do not owe you anything, you greedy old hag." Preston spat venom dripping from every syllable. "You handed me your money because you wanted to play rich. Now you are nothing." Two agents grabbed Preston by the arms and began frog-marching him down the center aisle of the ballroom. The crowd parted instantly, treating him like a highly contagious disease. He struggled against their grip, his arrogant facade completely shattered. As they dragged him toward the grand exit, he passed directly by the marble pillar where I was standing. I did not move. I stood perfectly straight, my emerald gown catching the flashing red and blue lights from outside. Our eyes locked. The sheer terror in his gaze met the absolute icy calm in mine. He realized in that singular agonizing moment that the woman he had ordered to use the service elevator was the very architect of his total destruction. "You did this?" Preston hissed, thrashing violently against the agents holding him. "You set me up, you bitter, worthless caterer. I will destroy you." I took a slow sip from my champagne glass, holding his gaze, until the agent shoved him out the front doors and into the humid Atlanta night. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off his frantic screaming. The ballroom was left in absolute shambles. The string quartet had fled. The floral arrangements were knocked over, spilling water and crushed white roses across the marble floor. The powerful elite guests were rushing to the exits, desperate to escape the fallout. And left standing alone in the wreckage of their fake empire were my parents and my sister. They were bankrupt, humiliated, and entirely exposed. They turned their heads, looking through the thinning crowd until their desperate, panicked eyes landed directly on me. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut, cutting off the frantic screaming of Preston Sterling as federal agents shoved him into the back of an armored SUV. Inside the grand ballroom of the Obsidian Estate, the silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. The string quartet had long since fled. The towering white floral centerpieces lay crushed against the polished marble floor, their expensive petals soaking in spilled vintage champagne. The flashing red and blue lights from the federal vehicles outside cast long, eerie shadows across the 30-foot LED screen, which still glaringly displayed the offshore bank accounts and the blonde mistress in Miami. The elite politicians, the billionaire investors, the mega-church pastors, they were all gone, having scattered like roaches the moment the FBI breached the perimeter. Left sitting in the absolute wreckage of their fabricated empire were the three people who had spent their entire lives making me feel completely worthless. Kierra was collapsed near the edge of the main stage. The emerald silk of her designer gown was stained with spilled wine, and her perfect makeup was heavily smeared across her face. She kept staring at her empty hands, her fingers still red from where she had violently ripped off the fake diamond necklace. David, a man who had commanded absolute authority in our household for decades, looked like a hollow broken shell. He was slumped against a VIP dining table, his expensive suit wrinkled, muttering incoherently about the second mortgage and his drained retirement fund. And then there was my mother, Brenda. She was on her knees in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by shattered crystal glasses. For 12 years, they had built a fortress of arrogance fueled by stolen money and a desperate need to appear superior. In less than an hour, I had systematically dismantled every single brick. They had no home, they had no retirement, they had no social status. They were entirely, utterly bankrupt. And as the reality of their permanent destruction finally settled over the cold room, their eyes collectively turned toward the only person left standing: me. Brenda stared at my custom Tom Ford gown and the heavy emerald silk that draped perfectly over my frame. The terrifying realization of my actual wealth finally pierced through her deep delusion. I was not the struggling caterer they had mocked in their kitchen. I was the multimillionaire who owned the very building they were crying in. I was the apex predator who had orchestrated their entire downfall. My mother did not stand up. She lacked the physical strength and the moral dignity. Instead, Brenda dragged herself across the spilled champagne and broken glass, crawling toward me on her hands and knees. It was a pathetic, grotesque display from a woman who had demanded nothing but absolute submission her entire life. She grabbed the hem of my expensive gown with shaking, desperate hands. Tears streamed down her heavily contoured face, ruining the elegant facade she prized above all else. "Zariah, please!" Brenda wailed, her voice a ragged, hysterical sob. "You have to help us. You have the money. You own this estate. You own that private equity firm. You have to save us from this. Preston is going to federal prison. The banks are going to foreclose on our house on Monday morning. We have absolutely nothing left. We are destitute." I looked down at the woman who had given birth to me. Her grip on my dress was tight, staining the silk with her sweat and desperation. Kierra finally looked up from the floor, her eyes wide with a sudden sickening hope. "Zariah, you have to pay his bail," Kierra begged, her voice cracking. "You can hire the best corporate defense lawyers in Atlanta. You can buy him out of this. You can pay off Mom and Dad's mortgage. We can keep the house. We can keep it quiet. We are your family. You cannot just leave us here to rot. You are our blood." David pushed himself off the VIP table, stumbling forward with his hands clasped together in a posture of total surrender. "Zariah, please," my father pleaded, his voice stripped of every ounce of its former cruelty. "We made a mistake. We trusted the wrong man. But you are successful now. You have an empire. You can afford to fix this. We are begging you, do not let us become homeless." I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer audacity of their pleas wash over me. They were not apologizing for abusing me. They were not showing remorse for abandoning me in the freezing rain when I was 19 years old. They were only crying because they were finally the ones experiencing the absolute terror of having nothing. They were looking at me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a walking ATM, a lifeline they felt entirely entitled to use. I reached into my sleek designer clutch. My fingers bypassed the solid black titanium credit card and the keys to my Maybach. Instead, I pulled out a small, crumpled, severely yellowed piece of paper. It had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times over the last decade. It was the only item I had kept from the cramped 4-bedroom house they had locked me out of. I gently pried my mother's shaking fingers off the fabric of my gown. I took a deliberate step back, forcing her to look up at me from the cold marble floor. I held the small piece of paper between my fingers. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was still unmistakably hers. "You want my help," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper that echoed clearly through the empty ballroom. "You want me to save your home. You want me to save your reputation. You want me to rescue you from the exact situation you created." I opened my fingers and let the yellowed piece of paper flutter down through the chilled air. It drifted slowly side to side until it landed squarely in Brenda's lap. She looked down at it, her weeping instantly hitching in her throat as she recognized the faded sticky note. She recognized the exact 6 words she had left on an empty kitchen counter for a terrified broke teenager 12 years ago. "You will figure it out," I said. The words struck them with the force of a physical blow. Brenda let out a choked, devastated gasp, clutching the sticky note to her chest, as if it were burning her skin. David collapsed back against the table, burying his face in his hands as loud, racking sobs tore through his chest. Kierra curled into a fetal position on the stage, screaming uncontrollably as the absolute finality of my rejection sealed her fate. I did not offer another word. I turned my back on the screaming, weeping ruins of my biological family. The heavy heels of my shoes clicked rhythmically against the marble floor as I walked out of the grand ballroom and pushed through the massive front doors. The cool, crisp Atlanta night air hit my face, carrying the scent of pine and absolute victory. My personal driver was waiting by the open door of my Maybach. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, smoothing out my emerald gown. I looked out the tinted window one last time at the flashing federal lights surrounding the Obsidian estate. I was completely free. The ultimate lesson from this story is that sharing DNA does not obligate you to tolerate abuse. Toxic relatives will often try to keep you in the restrictive boxes they originally built, mistaking your past vulnerability for permanent weakness. True empowerment comes from walking away from their false narratives and building your own independent success in total silence. You never owe your resources, your time, or your peace to people who only value you when they can exploit you. If this story resonated with you, hit the subscribe button and share your own experiences in the comments below.